What is going on, y'all? KM Best here, joined by Lamby Series. We are 8 Cubes. Today, we're going to talk, as always, about the 8 most important topics in Marvel Snap, starting with Thaddeus Ross, who is a 2/2 with an ability that says, if your opponent ends a turn without spending energy, draw a card that has a 10 or more power from your deck. Lamby, do you see any value in Thaddeus Ross at all, or is his 2/2 stat line just too bad to keep him around?
Okay, so this card obviously goes in the decks that want to play like Scar and Surtur because you search stat 10 cost cards, right? But the thing about this card right now is firstly you need to spend 2 energy to play this and it's understated for a 2 cost card. And honestly now it's so easy to spend all your energy, and the moment your opponent sees this card, they kind of will want to spend all their energy. So like I don't really like these kind of cards that are only good. Like the level of goodness of this card is dependent on your opponent. That this is the kind of cards that like I feel are a bit like not too great. Like they rely on your opponent to be good, and it's also understated, and plus it relies on your opponent to be good. So I don't really see this doing too much. Like I think the Scar deck, Surtur deck is really super consistent in what it does. Like it can just draw its cards naturally, and it will hit what it needs to hit. I don't really think this card will hit or fly when it launches, when it comes into the game. I'm not very optimistic on this card for sure.
I was fairly optimistic on this card, but I've
Mm.
become less optimistic on it as Mobius M has picked up prominence in the metagame. And the reason I was originally optimistic on it was like in a world where there weren't a bunch of people who were playing Mobius, this is a card that basically reads, if your opponent skips a turn, your chances of 0 cost Scar get like 20% higher. And that's a pretty good card, honestly, especially in a deck that has a ton of room for just a 2-drop that you could just put a card in there and be like fine with that, right? Like this is the exact deck that can compensate for not having a lot of power in the early game with massive late game scars, right? Like that's what the deck does very well. The problem is if people are playing Mobius, it might not be worth playing this deck at all. And then what is the point of it?
Yeah, okay, so I wanna touch on that a little bit because I feel like the thing about the Scar deck right now is that like every turn they have a power play, right? Like outside of like turn 2 or 3, like turn 3, 4, 5, 6, it's always big card, big card, big card, big card. Like to be completely frank, right? If you are playing a Mobius on turn 3 and I'm playing something that's way bigger than the Mobius on turn 3 and then 4, 5, 6, I'm already overpowering you without having to play a 0 cost Scar. So personally, I think the sacrifice of playing the Mobius that's really understated compared to what my opponent in the Scar deck is playing, you would be like, you would have less stats. You would have less stats than your opponent, even if I don't get to play my 0 cost Scar. So I feel like the Scar deck, the fact that it also can run tech like Cosmo to disrupt your opponent, after playing big stuff, I think will be fine. Though I really think the Scar deck's actually
Well, like that's the
fine, even though your
problem
opponent
though.
plays Mobius. I mean,
Like
I don't. That's why I think Thaddeus is not very good, because you are playing an underpowered card in hopes of drawing the Scar, and then your opponent plays Mobius, and then you spend turn 2 playing the underpowered card, right? Why not never play underpowered cards? Always play cards bigger than your opponent, then you don't really care about like the Mobius
that.
anyway.
Yeah, that I can see because I actually think Mobius is really good against that deck because it is
It
sort of
is.
predicated on like, yeah, okay, your guys will be bigger for like a couple turns, but if I can use some synergy stuff, right? If I'm playing like, Frigga
Mm-hmm.
Victoria hand or whatever, I'm going to be able to outpower you as long as your Scar isn't free, right? And so that kind of stuff is very, very, very powerful as long as Mobius is hooked up to an engine, right? As long as you have like an
Yes.
engine and a Mobius, you have a recipe for beating Scar. And my worry is that that recipe is very popular right now. Engine plus
Mm,
Mobius is kind of a lot of stuff. And I don't know if Thaddeus Ross goes in anything that isn't Scar. I've seen people speculating
exactly.
maybe Thanos, but it's like, really? Like, is that really what we want to do? Like, I don't know. And this whole season, it's actually like the first season in a while where I've looked at this and been like, man, these are like all cards for a specific deck. These are all
Mm.
cards that go in one thing, and they're not necessarily like the build around for that thing. They're like a good complementary piece for that thing. And that is a weird dynamic because Thaddeus Ross, like, yeah, it's a good complementary piece, but it's coming out basically exactly at the same time as there's a target on the deck it goes in's back that is currently being manipulated. And so it's like this card might actually release bad because of that. Lambie, what would you say your favorite thing to do with Sam Wilson is? There's a lot of different options. What is your favorite?
So the thing is, I also asked KM this question before the video, and I was very surprised he answered the same thing as me, but I guess we like the same thing. So I told him, he told me that the favorite thing that he liked to do, which is also the favorite thing that I like to do with Sam Wilson, is that it allows us to play Carl Obsidian in many different decks. It's kind of interesting, right? Like, just because you get a free 1/1 to start the game, you suddenly are allowed to play a 4/10 in quite literally any deck where you play Sam Wilson, which is a welcome change, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I know obviously Sam Wilson and moving the shield, and I even talked about, will we see OG Captain America resurface? Well, clearly OG Captain America did not resurface. But Sam Wilson having the shield on the board at the start of the game means you never have a dead 4/10, you know, because the shield can't even be destroyed anyway. So it's like you always have a 4/10. So I kind of like that aspect of it. But obviously, Sam also has allowed. I mean, Sam also has allowed certain decks to be more popular for sure. But like personally, I just really love the fact that you can play Carl Obsidian in like so many different things right now.
I won't say that the OG Captain America has not gone anywhere, because the ongoing Doom 2099 deck is actually quite good and popular and does play him. I do think that, and I'll talk about this later, in topic number 5, I specifically booked a little bit of time for me to dive into the specific dynamic here. But there is something to be said for like zigging when the metagame is zagging. And what I mean by that is right now this is a metagame that is very about Mobius plus engine, very about Shang-Chi, very not about Enchantress, very not about engaging with ongoing cards, very not about Red Guardian because of Sam Wilson making it so easy to protect stuff, which makes your Doom 2099s better. And so like there's an empty space where normally there might be some amount of tech cards that are good against an ongoing deck that get played that are not being played right now. And it also occupies a space where it is an engine plus Mobius deck, a deck that can play Mobius and be happy about it because the card just says ongoing on it, right? And so you have a deck that is uniquely well positioned right now that also has like it's the kind of deck where it's like this could be really well positioned for 2 weeks, and then once people really adjust to it, it might be terrible, right? Like this is the kind of thing where it is so dependent on the shape of everything around it to be as good as it is right now that I find it hard to say that that is one of my favorite things to do with Sam. Whereas Cull Obsidian, I am very confident is just going to be like, that's a thing. We're going to be doing Sam Wilson, Cull Obsidian for a very long time. We're going to be doing Sam Wilson and Craven for a very long time. Sam Wilson and ongoing, I think, is going to be a little more like flickering in and out of the meta depending on what's being valued right now. That said, great card.
Go ahead. Great card, yeah. But to add on to that whole ongoing comment earlier, which is really interesting because ongoing stuff usually gets out of control for a bit, right?
Yeah.
And then once it gets too out of control, let's just name the cards. Rogue, Enchantress. You get what I'm trying to say?
Like
yeah, there's so many things that
US
obliterate
agent?
ongoing stuff. Yeah. It kind of literally just needs to get a little bit too out of hand, and then it dumps.
Yes.
You know?
Like it gets right up to that line, and then it's like, oh god, and then it just falls off the cliff. Like it's very Wile E. Coyote running on air, and then he looks down and realizes that he's running on air, and then he falls. That's kind of the dynamic a lot of ongoing centric decks have had. One thing I do like really enjoy about that deck though is you could just be like, here's 30 power in 2 lanes. Like, just actually deal with my 30 power. It honestly feels a little bit like playing Mr. Negative without actually having to play Mr. Negative, and you get to play Mobius so you beat actual Mr. Negative. But it's like the same, like, I'm Psylocking into my Doom 2099. Like, here we go. Like, it's a fun deck to play. It is absurdly face up. I think the higher up in Infinite you get, like in terms of like, I'm not talking like top 10%, I'm talking like top 50, top 100. The higher up you get, the worse the deck gets, I think. Like you get to a point where it's like, wow, that's really face up. But it can do a lot of good numbers, and I'm really happy about that. Because I did not think that a deck like that would be able to be brought back with Sam Wilson. I thought it would be Craven stuff. I thought it would be, the Cull Obsidian stuff. That stuff I saw coming. The ongoing stuff I honestly didn't, and I'm happy that the metagame is arranged in such a way that allows it to be successful right now. I'm happy that it gets to be a deck that is Engine plus Mobius and get that value out of Mobius right now. But as we'll see later, that's not a guarantee that things will always be that way.
Yep.
Joaquin Phoenix. Wait, no, that's not his name. Joaquin Falcon. Nope, definitely not that either. Joaquin Torres, Falcon number 2, is a card that does not do enough to be worth purchasing, but is not so much bad as sort of the reverse of what we're talking about with like metagame context here, where this is a card that goes in a deck that is pretty good at putting like 20 power in every lane. You're making like 3 demons, you're just like making a bunch of dudes, but really bad at getting to 30 in any lane at all ever. And when it has to go up against decks that can just do 30 power in 2 lanes, you just start sort of staring at yourself and being like, all right, well, I'm an idiot for trying this. And that is ultimately where I find myself with Joaquin, where it's like, this is a fine card in the archetype that it goes in. It can generate some strong stuff, but that archetype is fundamentally outclassed by a lot of other decks that are just able to do more points than it. And I will admit, I haven't played any US Agent bounce. I think that could go a long way towards making at least a few of the good matchups, of the bad matchups, less terrible. But it's still a little bit iffy to me.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on this one. I don't have much to add on this, except like if you rewind to the previous video of 8 cubes, I said that this was probably not gonna be good enough, and I was quite right. The thing about this card is, firstly, it's a setup card, right? And I am very sure that this card will be infinitely better at 2 cost. At 3 cost, it's actually super not good enough. Like, there's so much cards that need to be played after this card. You get what I'm trying to say?
No, I get it, but like, that doesn't even solve the problem. Like, what? I get more demons? Okay. The problem is, like, I can't go tall enough.
Deal, though.
But like, I can't go tall enough anyway.
But yeah, it's like 1 more turn of setting up, so I think it actually does matter. It's just that at 3 right now, the things that it sets up for, you don't have enough turns to do it. Like, and then we are saying draw on turn 3, by the way. If you don't draw it on turn 3, it's just infinitely
very bad
worse as well. Yeah.
But like, I don't know. I don't even think that would do it, right? Like, it would make it like ostensibly a better card, but like, what the problem is, you can't go tall. You don't have the ability. Your best lanes are always like, you know, a 2-3 and then 3-1-6s. And it's like, if you can't win a lane like that, you can't ever, like, it's so hard to go past 24 power in a lane. You just, like, it's actually really hard to do. And so if you made him a 2-3, it's like, yeah, okay, you know, that's cool. But like, again, how am I getting to 24 power? How am I doing it? And I don't know. I feel like that's like the fundamental issue is not related to Joaquin at all, actually. It's just the deck he goes in can't get tall.
So essentially what you're saying is stacking 1 cost cards is not gonna be enough.
Yeah. And so your options are like, oh, I'm going to play Hitmonkey Black Swan. And when it works, you actually have a guy that can get tall enough. But when it doesn't work, he's 9 power. And it's like, congratulations, your Hitmonkey 3 Demons play is now getting you to, what, instead of 24, it's 27. Like, congratulations. You did.
Okay, Forge needs to go back to 1 cost. that will work, I think.
I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. But yeah, like Forge at 1 cost might do it. Being able to like double up those buffs, things like that, like that might be able to do it and do enough. But even then, it's like, man, the ceiling is not that high. Like, it's not that high.
You're right. It's not that high.
Let's talk about the man of the hour. We could probably just sit here and go back and forth and just name decks that Mobius is good against. Do you want to do that? You want to just name me a deck that it's good against, and I'll name you one back?
Scar.
Mr. Negative.
Anything with death.
Discard.
Yeah, I'm running off. I'm running a blank right now.
Don't worry, like
Mockingbird stuff. Any Mockingbird thing,
like,
yes.
The point has been made, I think, where it's just like you can just like name off, and it probably ends up being like 60% of the tier list last week, where it's just like, okay, so it's good against Arishem if they have Mockingbird. It's good against anything with Scar. It turns the
Swarm.
Yeah, I said discard. Yeah, it turns the discard deck into not the ridiculous combo deck that it can be. It's just a really phenomenal card right now, and it got a secret hidden buff, which is that Red Guardian now has Sam Wilson body blocking a lot of the good targets, so people are more willing to cut Red Guardian and get Mobius in. And because Mobius is hitting so much right now, and like he is, to be clear, like I'm going to make a claim here. I don't know if it's a correct claim because I think I'm probably forgetting something like Echo or whatever, but Mobius M. Mobius is one of the worst tech cards in the game. Not just on rate, but on cube equity, because he cannot ever catch you by surprise. He is always going to be face up. Even an Echo can catch people by surprise if it's tempoed out with priority. Mobius can never catch anyone by surprise and will never be a good turn 6 play, which means he fundamentally has lower cube equity than every other tech card. So the bar for him going into your deck is actually much, much higher than it is for every other tech card. Every other tech card is way easier to justify because of that. And yet, we are in a Mobius meta, which should tell you something.
You see, this is why, okay, I'm gonna go back to the first or second topic again, which is
Sure.
this is why I really love the Searcher Scar deck, because I'm just gonna, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I don't think I am. Okay, so you play Mobius on 3, I play Surtur on 3, which is a 3-10 eventually. Then on turn 4, I will be playing a 4-10. I am already ahead about 13 to 12 points on the board when you play the Mobius on 3. This is why I really love that deck, because when you play Mobius, because you kind of have to, if not my Scar is free, by turn 4, I'm about like, 10 plus points ahead of you, which is something that you need to fill the gap with. And you don't really have a choice because you need to play the Mobius. If not, I will be 20 plus points ahead of you with the Scar. That's why I really like the Scar deck right now, because your opponent's kind of forced to play the Mobius, but I'm just playing bigger things than you already. So that's why I feel like the Scar deck is still well positioned despite Mobius being in the game.
It's definitely, it doesn't hurt, right? Like, this is what I mean when I talk about Mobius being hard to get into decks, because in order for him to be justifiable, because he doesn't ever actually win a matchup on his own. Like,
exactly.
You need other stuff. Like, you need to, like, be able to win a game while effectively just, like, devoting 3 energy to nothing, right? Like, that's actually the real tax of Mobius. So, like, we're lucky right now that we exist in a world where there's, like, a bunch of different builds that, like, of cards that can compensate for this, right? Mobius in every Doom 2099 deck, whether that be Arishem or if you're like playing the Psylocke stuff, right? Like Mobius in your Spectrum Doom 2099 deck. He says ongoing. There's actual upside there. Mobius in your Heimdall move deck, because I guess you can just do that, right? Mobius in your Misery Victoria hand deck because you have enough points to compensate. But like, there is a genuine, not necessarily lack. Not every deck is going to have the engine to be able to make up for a Mobius being in the deck.
Yes. Yeah, essentially it's like when the good Mobius deck has to be, okay, you play Mobius and then turn 4, 5, 6, you have to go big, go big, go big. Like your deck has to naturally be able to scale faster than the decks that Mobius beats.
Yes.
That's how you play Mobius in a good deck.
Like it has to, like, because the you talk about like, oh, I'm ahead by 10 or whatever, right? But it's very linear. So if you're scaling multiplicatively, then you are able to beat that linearity and you can stop them from having like anything to compete with you with the Mobius and then multiplicatively scale. Doom 2099 is a great example of this, but there are plenty of decks that do stuff like that, right? So all you have to do is scale harder than them, but it is like you have to do it.
Yes, you have to.
Welcome to KM's Soapbox. I have a thing that I've been trying to express for a while that I'm going to try to put into words here in a brief way for maybe the first time ever. There is this thing that happens in Marvel Snap where a deck will be good because it naturally wants to run certain tech cards that the metagame is also rewarding people for running in decks where they are not as natural of a fit. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, right now we are in a pretty Mobius-heavy metagame. A deck that actually wants to run Mobius, like the Spectrum deck, that is getting something out of running Mobius that isn't just him stopping you, that's a deck that has a sort of inbuilt advantage. And I think Mill is a great example of how temporary this kind of inbuilt advantage can be. Mill is a deck that we've talked about this. It was predicated on a couple of major factors. The first is being the best Iron Patriot deck. the best deck at beating Iron Patriots from your opponent and the best deck at winning Iron Patriots from you. The second is being able to go over the top of other mid-range decks with Death. The third is that it had a bunch of relevant tech cards that it naturally wanted to run. Shang-Chi and Killmonger and Red Guardian. These are cards that it wanted to run, and also some of the most popular tech cards in the game at the time. All of those things are deeply hurt when the metagame shifts towards being Mobius heavy. Because suddenly, your Iron Patriot, winning Iron Patriot doesn't matter, they played a Mobius. Suddenly, your Death doesn't matter, they played a Mobius. And because your deck is so sort of locked in on this, where it's like, you run those cards because they are part of your engine, right? When those cards are really relevant as being part of your engine. When Fenris Wolf is good against a Hela deck. When a card like Killmonger is good against any deck playing 1-drops like the Victoria hand deck. When your mill stuff is good against Mr. Negative. When your Death is relevant against your against all of the other mid-range decks. When those cards are good, you're basically benefiting for free. But the downside is when those cards become less good in the context of a metagame, you can't take them out of your deck because they're part of your engine. And so you're stuck with them. And so you have these decks that are like extremely good in a specific context, but then the context changes and they can't keep up because the context changed because of them. And so Mill was so successful, and now I feel like it's like kind of an actively bad deck, a bad choice to make. And I worry that the Sam Wilson ongoing deck is in a similar spot, where it's like right now it's benefiting from all of these structural factors, and then as soon as those factors change, it's about to like get massively hit by Enchantress and stuff like that, right? Like, it's a weird spot. And I just think people should be more cognizant of the ways in which things can shift and the contexts in which decks arise. Because Mill arose largely as an answer to sort of like V-handy Moonstone type decks, as an answer to like Mr. Negative, as a sometimes answer to like things that are able to, like a wide variety of Iron Patriot metagame type stuff. And now that everyone is playing Mobius, there's a lot less of that for it to beat up on. And that's just enough sometimes to make a deck go from like being a 53% win rate deck to a 48. And that's a really big fall.
Actually, all you just said is really very interesting to me, and it's one of the things that I really like the most about the ever-changing Marvel Snap meta. Like, I'm not going to add too much to what you said because I think everything you said already makes a lot of sense. But I think what I really like about Marvel Snap's metas is that it's very... There are some decks that the moment certain cards get nerfed or buffed, those decks instantly disappear, right? Like, they just leave so quickly, and some decks, they leave a bit more gradually, you know. The decks that run stuff that are only good because of said meta or said situation, those will leave the fastest when the meta changes, you know. So it's kind of interesting. It's one of the things that I really like about Marvel Snap metas, which is like every time there's a patch, every time there's like OTA or whatever, if you can identify what leaves fast, you can just like cut out all these like decks that you know that you don't have to bother thinking about because those are going to be irrelevant, and just focus on what's going to be the next like meta tier 1, because you know those decks have a bit more staying power, you know, like especially we keep talking about ongoing stuff, right? Ongoing stuff always feels like flavor of the week. It's never really
fragile,
flavor of the quarter of the year, because that's too long for ongoing to survive that long, you know. Like they die out, like we said, they die out so quickly. Like, they last for 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, and then once that becomes too much, all the tech comes back in, those decks become, or ongoing decks just leave and get completely obliterated, and then we get the new meta again. So it's very interesting just thinking about it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if there's one thing that's going to keep the current crop of ongoing decks alive, it's that they're actually just Doom 2099 decks. And so Enchantress isn't even that good. Like, but like the more they're actually ongoing decks, the worse it is. Doom 2099, it's like, okay, you know, that's at least a good card. And so like the deck is benefiting from so much, like Red Guardian not being relevant against it because it's a Sam Wilson deck. Huge upgrade to your Doom 2099 strategy, right? And so like if that deck is going to stick around, I feel like a lot of it is going to be because it is a Doom 2099 deck. And so when you look at a card that like sort of had a knock-on benefit effect from Sam Wilson, Doom 2099 is probably like the exact card to look at, because now suddenly Red Guardian sucks against him, and it was really good previously.
I'm gonna go out and say that if the ongoing stuff starts to shift a bit out, the Doom 2099 stuff won't won't be sustainable, because even in the past, Doom 2099 wasn't really that much of a huge point output deck, right? Like, it's only relevant a bit now because of the ongoing stuff. So I think like once the ongoing stuff leaves, Doom 29 is gonna be like, it's gonna fade a bit into oblivion, I
A
feel.
lot of that was, though, because Red Guardian was a really good policeman of it. Like, we had two good answers to Doom 2099, was Red Guardian and Lady Deathstrike. Now we have one good answer to Doom 2099. I'm not saying you can't bring Lady Deathstrike back. You probably could. But, like, yeah. In the last time we had a metagame like this, Lady Deathstrike was a reasonable card, a pretty good one. But this is a metagame that now has one less major answer to your Doom 2099, and that matters.
Okay.
Any wishes for the OTA, or do you just want me to fire some at you?
I just have one. I mean, I wouldn't say I want it, but okay, I guess I want it. I want ongoing stuff to be leaned so heavy into that they would have to they will have to nerf some of them. Like, I mean, we already have counters in like Enchantress and stuff like that, but can you imagine if they buff more ongoing stuff and then they realize that it's too much?
What would
That'll
they
be kind of
even
interesting.
do? Like, what you want to
Or really
give
even
Claw the power back? Like, what do you mean?
that would be good. I always felt like Claw should have been like the way it was after the buff, because it's such a good early pool 1-2 card. I feel like they should keep
You
it
know
that
what?
way, but that's just me.
I agree. I actually do agree.
Right?
I think they could give Claw the point of power back. I think he got hit for Agent Venom's sins and didn't need to get hit again. I think Claw very much deserves his 8 power back. But at the same
Yes.
time, it's like that deck's not even playing Claw, so who cares?
Fine.
It's not even doing that. So like, what do you want them to actually buff? Buff Captain America? Go to 3/4?
I mean, I've said buff Punisher a few different times. We had this OTA hopes thing. I've said buff Punisher, but
Sure.
I feel like they can never get buff Punisher correct. Like how can you make the card good but not broken?
I think you could make him a 3/4 and it'd be fine.
Okay, but that's so like,
I
I
think
wouldn't
you
say
could make
lame, but like you just add one power to unplayed cards and hope it works out. I mean, like Claw, you had to add quite a bit of power.
I'll tell you what. If Punisher was a Series 5 card, I think he'd be a 3/5.
Yeah, because 3/5 is the gold standard of every
I
new
think
card, right?
it'd be a 3/5 to 3/9, baby. That's
Yeah, that's
buy
true.
that
I
card.
feel like there's this pile of cards that were created so early in the game's lifeline that they forgot that these could be also 3/5s or 4/6s, right? If they were released now.
I mean, first of all, they'd be 4/7s. Second of all,
Yes,
like,
yes.
like the something Glenn gave a team answer that I actually think was like really good that they acknowledged, which basically said something to the effect of Series 1 and 2 are our starter decks. Like, the $10 starter decks that you buy for every other game that are full of cards that are total ass, but they're good for learning the game. Series 1 and 2 are that. And I think it's worth acknowledging that. Like, you're not going to get meta-relevant cards out of a starter deck a lot of the time. This is not ever really a thing that happens.
But starter decks have staples. And
no,
I
they
think there are some
don't. They have, like,
staples that
lands in Magic. There's, like...
Okay, you put my Yu-Gi-Oh friend, starter decks have Dark Hole. Anyway. And Heavy Storm, but anyway.
Yo!
I mean, like, starter decks can... Yeah, we can have cards that appear in pool 1 and pool 2 that can be carried over to our pool 3, 4, 5 lifetime, right? But, okay, not too many, obviously, but some of them can be carried over. Yeah.
I wanted to just give a little bit of shout out to Scream. Really happy to see her back. I think a lot of people were wrongfully very overreactive about her losing a point of power. I personally thought that before her nerf, she was just like very easily, not necessarily like the best card in the game, but like a very easy top 5, because her deck is so shit without her. It is kind of unreal how much that deck would not exist if she didn't. And now, though, she's, a much more reasonable card, right? Like the sort of redistribution of power that they did with giving Spider-Man going to 2/4 and her losing a point of power. Like, your worst 2-drop in that deck now is just a 2/4. Like, that's your worst 2-drop in the deck is a 2/4. That's pretty sick. Like, that's just like a really cool numbers game thing here. You're now no longer such a like Scream on 2 or die deck. You get to have Sam Wilson, you get to have Scream, you get to have a 2/4, you get to have a Craven. Like, you have a relatively even distribution of power now. The deck feels much more fun to play. And there are a bunch of different Scream decks now that exist, partially because Sam Wilson and Craven go in all of them, but partially because Scream is very good against opposing Sam Wilsons.
Yeah, I just want to think a bit like, because the current Scream feels like what Angela or Tina was to their respective decks, in
Yeah.
their time, in their lifeline, which is essentially what you said, right? Deck is way worse without said card. I wanted to say something else, but yeah, but deck is way worse without said card, because can you imagine in Angela or Tina's prime, you never draw the Tina or Angela. It's like
Yeah.
not drawing the Scream when you for your entire deck, you just lose like what 10 power or something. It's
Yeah, but like
it's it's it's, it's so insane.
it's worse though, because like Thena, it's like, okay, on turn 3 you have Thena Kitty, on turn
Okay.
4 you have Thena and a 2-drop, right? Like those decks were so low curve that you were often able to get her into the deck. That's to say nothing of Angela, who like could be played on the last turn of the game and still be a reasonably sized 2-drop, even if you just like put some dudes behind her, right? Like because those decks were so low to the ground, they were able to sort of ease the pain of not drawing that card, because the things that triggered that card all cost like 1, right? Whereas everything that triggers Scream costs like 2, 3, 4, 5. And
Yeah,
so you
right.
can't
Yeah.
actually, like, it's actually so much worse to not draw Scream than it was to not draw those. Because you can at
Yeah.
least get something out of those.
Yeah, actually that point makes a lot of sense, because for Scream you kind of need to draw the Scream early, right? And then you need to have back-to-back turns of chaining the effects that buff the Scream. It's not like, I think the Angela point is very important. Like Angela and okay, not so much Tina. Angela, you can literally spam a lot of cards on the final turn, and your Angela is like a significant sized 2-drop, right? Whereas for Scream, it's really a multi-turn setup. It's kind of almost impossible to do like a decent sized Scream if you draw Scream on turn 6.
Yeah, and like, so that's the other thing the Spider-Man thing helped. Because it gave you the
Yeah,
option to have a turn 4 Scream that wasn't total dog shit, right? You can play
agreed.
Scream Spider-Man now, and she's like
Okay, that's the word
actually
I wanted
doing
to say,
something.
but you said it. But
Yeah.
anyway.
I explained a little bit of the lore around the Super Bowl to Lambie just before we recorded this. And full disclosure, we're recording it after, I'm very happy with how the result went. I'd be happier if the Chiefs scored 0 points. But this topic is called the Chiefs because the way I explained them to Lambie was basically like, all right, we hate them not because they're necessarily hateable, but because I really would be like to see anything else at the top of the metagame. I would like to see anyone else succeed because I am sick of watching these dudes win. It sucks so bad. It's so boring. It's so annoying. When I was younger, I was a huge NBA basketball fan. And the thing that made me fall out of love with the NBA and stop being like a daily NBA watcher was when Kevin Durant went to the Warriors and it became a foregone conclusion. It was just boring and it sucked and it was awful. And it turns out once you fall off, it's hard to get back in. And I feel like the Chiefs three-peat could have done that for a lot of people. So, huge shout out to my man, Jalen Hurts. You are forever a hero for what you've done here. But the relevance of this topic to Marvel Snap is Lambie brought this up and I didn't get it. He's like, is there a deck that is the Chiefs of Marvel Snap? Where you're just like, please stop winning. And he thinks there is.
Yeah, so if you really look back at all our videos, the one thing that we mentioned in the last few months that we finally stopped talking about is move bounce, right?
God.
Move bounce has been there in multiple metas, and I think finally we can talk about it less and we don't feel so bad, because we talk about the 8 most important topics in Marvel Snap, right? And move bounce was always one of them because it was always there and it was there in multiple metas. I think finally, okay, firstly, move bounce is still a very good deck. Don't
There
get
we
me wrong.
go.
It's just that
It's like,
yeah, see, they still can win. It's like the Chiefs, they still can win. It's just that you don't want to see it keep winning because it's been winning for so long. So I think finally we've come to a point where move bounce is not that winning. It's still winning, by the way,
I don't
but it's
know.
not that winning. So we don't have to mandatorily talk about it every single time. Yeah, I think that's just my point. Like I'm so glad that like I don't have to look at our topics list and like, I think we should put move bounce on here. Like I don't feel that way anymore.
Yeah, well, give it a week. We'll see how you feel in a week.
Yeah,
I
once we
feel like you can easily convince me it's the best deck in the game right now. Like when you think about what people are doing, that like awkward ass Doom 2099 stuff, how does that deck beat the card Human Torch?
That's true.
Like
That's true.
it's
I mean,
just like
yeah, it's the same thing,
the
right?
same
Once
thing.
once
Yeah.
certain ongoing stuff gets a bit too over the
Yep.
top, people start putting that Enchantress back in the deck, then they all drop all the way down, and what's the next best thing with a
Yep.
lot of points? Move bounce.
Yep. And it's just like I am
We
like,
back.
yeah, like I've got a lot of fear in my heart for that one. But hopefully it'll remain, you know, like it's one of those things where it's like it's like a sentiment nerf rather than an
Yes.
actual nerf. Like it was an actual nerf, but it like people just aren't playing the deck, and like my take on that is thank God, because I hate that
Yes.
thing. But I don't know how long that's gonna last. Is sort of my worry about it. That is definitely a fear I have. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching this episode of 8 Cubes. As always, I have been KM Best. He has been Lambie Series. And we will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Lambie, take us out of here.
Like, comment, subscribe. See you guys in the next one. Bye bye.